The church bells rang with a careful restraint that autumn morning, their sound muted by fog and fear. In the small European town, stone buildings leaned toward one another as if sharing secrets, and every window seemed to watch the street below. Boots echoed where laughter once had. Flags bearing the crooked symbol of the Reich hung from balconies like a curse stitched into fabric. People had learned to walk with their eyes down, their thoughts guarded, their prayers whispered only in their hearts. Father Matthias Keller had learned that silence could be louder than any sermon. He had arrived in the town years before the war, a thin young priest with wire-rimmed glasses and hands that trembled slightly when he blessed the congregation. He was not known for fiery speeches or grand theology. He listened more than he spoke. He remembered names. He noticed when a child stopped coming to Mass, when a widow's candles went unlit. In quieter times, that was enough. But by 1942, quiet had become dangerous. The Nazis had come first with promises of order, then with laws, then with lists. Jewish families were marked, counted, and slowly erased from public life. Shops closed. Schools emptied. A star appeared on coats and sleeves, bright and merciless. Trains passed through the town more often now, their cargo never discussed. Everyone knew, and everyone pretended not to. Matthias watched it all from the steps of his church, offering comfort where he could, careful not to draw attention. He had been warned once already by an officer who attended Mass irregularly, sitting in the back with a pistol visible at his belt. The message had been polite but clear. The church was to concern itself with souls, not politics. Matthias nodded and agreed, and then went on doing what he believed God required. The first child arrived on a rainy night in November. A knock came at the rectory door long after curfew. Matthias hesitated only a moment before opening it. A woman stood there, soaked through, her hair plastered to her face, a small girl clinging to her coat. The woman did not introduce herself. She did not need to. "They took my husband this morning," she said, her voice flat with exhaustion. "They will come for us next." Matthias ushered them inside without a word. He gave the child a blanket and warm milk, and he listened as the woman spoke in rushed fragments. Neighbors disappearing. Names on notices. A friend who worked at the station and whispered warnings. She had heard that the priest helped people, that he knew ways to make children invisible. Matthias had never claimed such a thing. But when the woman asked if he would hide her daughter, he did not say no. The girl's name was Ruth. She was 7 years old and watched everything with enormous, frightened eyes. When her mother kissed her goodbye in the rectory kitchen, Matthias turned away, pretending to look for bread, because some moments were too holy to witness. That night, Ruth slept in the small room behind the sacristy, the smell of incense clinging to the walls. Matthias sat awake in his chair until dawn, rosary beads cutting into his fingers. He understood, with a clarity that left him cold, that his life had just split into a before and an after. The next weeks passed like a tightening noose. Matthias found papers through contacts he barely trusted, baptismal records altered with steady hands, names changed, birthdays shifted. Ruth became Anna, an orphan from the countryside, placed under church protection. He taught her Catholic prayers she recited carefully, though sometimes she mixed the words with Hebrew ones she half remembered. Matthias never corrected her. Soon there were others. A boy with a limp whose parents had vanished overnight. Twin sisters who spoke only when holding hands. A toddler smuggled in a laundry cart, too young to understand why his mother never came back. Matthias did not seek them out. They came to him, carried by rumor and desperation. The church became a place of layers and shadows. By day, it functioned as it always had. Candles were lit. Confessions were heard. German soldiers knelt in the pews beside townsfolk, heads bowed, rifles stacked near the door. By night, trapdoors opened. Walls shifted. The old wine cellar beneath the rectory filled with beds made from straw and donated blankets. Matthias learned to lie. He lied with documents and with smiles. He lied when asked why food supplies were short. He lied when an officer remarked that the church seemed unusually busy. Each lie settled on his conscience like a stone, and each night he asked forgiveness for them, knowing he would repeat them the next day. Fear became constant, a low hum beneath every action. The children learned it quickly. They knew when to be silent, when to hide, when to become someone else entirely. Matthias taught them songs in Latin because the words were strange enough to mask accents and origins. He told Bible stories as bedtime tales, choosing ones about exile, survival, and deliverance. Outside, the war pressed closer. News came in fragments. defeats on the Eastern Front, Allied bombings in distant cities, retaliations, executions. Posters appeared on walls announcing punishments for those who aided Jews or enemies of the state. Death was listed casually, as if it were a fine for parking in the wrong place. One morning, a black car stopped in front of the church. Matthias saw it from the vestry window and felt his breath leave him. Two men stepped out, their coats immaculate, their faces blank. The taller one carried a folder. The other scanned the street as if memorizing it. They entered without removing their caps. "Father Keller," the taller man said, "we have some questions." Matthias led them into his office, closing the door carefully behind them. His hands were steady as he poured coffee. He had practiced this moment in his mind 100 times. He reminded himself to speak slowly, to appear helpful, to reveal nothing. They asked about parish records, about recent arrivals, about rumors of missing children. Matthias answered with partial truths and feigned ignorance. He spoke of orphans displaced by bombing, of families fleeing the countryside. He cited church authority and charitable duty. The men listened without expression. Then the shorter one smiled. "We would like to see the cellar," he said. Time seemed to stretch thin. Matthias nodded, as if this were the most natural request in the world. As he stood, he prayed not for rescue, but for courage. If this was the end, he would face it standing. They descended the steps together. The cellar smelled of damp earth and old wine. Barrels lined the walls. Cobwebs clung to beams. Matthias spoke about storage and rationing. The men shone their flashlight around, its beam cutting through the dark. Behind the false wall, children pressed hands over mouths and held their breath. Ruth clutched a wooden cross Matthias had given her, her knuckles white. The flashlight lingered, then moved on. "Very well," the taller man said. "You understand, Father, that the Reich values cooperation." "Of course," Matthias replied. They left without another word. That night, Matthias wept alone in the church, the pews empty, the candles burned low. He did not weep from relief, but from the knowledge that this would not be the last time. Each day the risk grew. Each child added weight to the danger. And yet, when another knock came days later, he still opened the door. By winter, the cellar held more than 20 children. Food was scarce. Illness spread quickly in the cold. Matthias bartered church silver for medicine. He sent trusted parishioners on errands they did not question too closely. Some helped knowingly, others simply did as they were asked, choosing not to see the full picture. The children asked questions Matthias could not answer. When would they go home? Why couldn't they see their parents? Why did soldiers hate them? He told them that evil often wore uniforms, that bravery was sometimes just staying alive, that their parents loved them more than words could say. At night, as bombs rumbled in the distance, Matthias wondered how long he could keep this fragile miracle alive. He knew the war was turning, but turning wars crushed people beneath their wheels. He felt watched, measured, tested. And somewhere beyond the town, trains continued to run on time. The bells rang again one morning, sharp and insistent, cutting through the fog. Matthias stood at the altar, his voice steady as he spoke the familiar words. In the pews, soldiers listened. Beneath the stone floor, children waited. The priest folded his hands, and for a brief moment, allowed himself to hope. Winter tightened its grip on the town like a clenched fist. Snow gathered in corners where sunlight never reached, and the river at the edge of town slowed to a dark, sluggish crawl beneath sheets of ice. The church remained standing, solid and ancient, but even its thick stone walls could not keep the cold from creeping in. Beneath it, in the hidden cellar, the children learned how to sleep without shivering, how to share warmth without speaking, how to listen for footsteps above them and judge from their rhythm whether danger had come. Father Matthias adjusted his routines carefully. He learned which soldiers preferred early mass and which slept late after drinking. He noted changes in patrol schedules, the sound of different engines, the way fear moved through the town like a rumor with legs. Survival depended on details now. A missed cue, a careless word, could collapse everything. Ruth had grown quieter, but stronger. She helped the younger ones wash their faces with icy water and reminded them to whisper their prayers. At night, she sat close to Matthias when he came down to check on them, asking him to tell stories again. He chose stories where the weak endured, where deliverance came slowly and at a cost. He never lied about happy endings, but he framed hope as something stubborn, something that refused to die even when it was buried. Food became the greatest challenge. Rations shrank, and questions grew sharper. Matthias coordinated with a small circle of parishioners he trusted implicitly. An elderly baker slipped extra loaves into delivery crates marked for the church. A farmer brought sacks of potatoes at dawn, claiming he was paying an old debt. No one spoke openly. Silence became a shared language. One evening, an air raid siren wailed unexpectedly, slicing through the town like a scream. People poured into shelters, soldiers barked orders, and chaos reigned. Matthias used the moment to move 3 children from the cellar to a safer hiding place in the bell tower, climbing narrow stairs while bombs thudded somewhere far off. Each explosion shook dust from the rafters. The children clung to him, their fear absolute, their trust complete. When the sirens finally stopped, the town emerged shaken but standing. Smoke drifted on the horizon. The church bells rang again, signaling survival, and Matthias guided the children back down, his legs trembling long after they were safe. The next day, the Gestapo returned. This time, they did not knock. The door burst open during the afternoon, sending parishioners scattering. 3 officers entered, weapons visible, their presence sucking the air from the room. The same shorter man from before stood among them, his smile gone. "We have received new information," he said calmly. "You will answer our questions." They searched rooms meticulously. Drawers were emptied. Papers were examined. Matthias answered what he could, deflected what he couldn't, and prayed constantly that nothing had been overlooked. When they moved toward the cellar again, his heart hammered so loudly he was sure they could hear it. A sudden noise echoed from outside. Shouting. A vehicle backfiring or something worse. One officer cursed and stepped away from the cellar door, turning toward the sound. The moment stretched, fragile and thin. Then a messenger burst in, breathless, whispering urgently to the officer in charge. There had been an incident near the station. An escape attempt. Reinforcements were needed. The officers left as abruptly as they had arrived. Matthias sank into a chair once the door closed, his body weak with delayed terror. He knew then that the margin for error was gone. The town was no longer safe. The children had to be moved, scattered, hidden beyond his reach. That night, he told them the truth in gentle pieces. They would be leaving soon. They would stay with families, in monasteries, on farms far from the main roads. They must remember their new names. They must trust strangers one last time. There were tears, quiet and restrained. The younger ones did not fully understand. The older ones understood too well. Ruth listened without crying, her face pale but resolved. When the others slept, she stayed awake. "Will you come with us?" she asked. Matthias shook his head. "I must stay here." "Why?" "Because someone has to open the door when the next child knocks." The first group left before dawn, guided by a resistance courier who knew forest paths and back roads. Matthias watched them disappear into the gray light, each step carrying them farther from him and closer to an uncertain future. He did not bless them aloud. He had learned that prayers spoken too boldly could draw attention. Over the following weeks, the cellar emptied. Each departure felt like a small death and a quiet victory. Matthias kept careful track, marking names and destinations in a coded ledger he hid inside the spine of a missile. He feared forgetting more than capture. The church felt emptier now, echoing in ways it hadn't before. Matthias continued to say Mass, continued to greet soldiers with the same calm nod, continued to live the double life that had become his only life. The war crept closer. Allied planes passed overhead more often. The Reich's confidence began to crack, and with it came cruelty sharpened by desperation. One night, Matthias was arrested. They took him without explanation, hands bound, head forced down as he was pushed into the back of a truck. The church receded behind him, its tower cutting a dark line against the sky. He wondered if anyone would light candles in his absence, if the bell would ring again. In the interrogation room, the questions came fast and hard. Names, numbers, locations, accusations. Matthias answered carefully, truth wrapped in layers of ambiguity. He was struck once, then again. Pain flared and faded, replaced by a calm he did not recognize as his own. At some point, exhausted and bleeding, he realized something strange. He was not afraid of dying. He was afraid only of failing. Hours later, perhaps days, he was released without explanation, dumped on a side street like discarded luggage. The reasons did not matter. What mattered was that he was alive, and the work was not finished. He limped back to the church before dawn. The door was still locked. The keys still fit. Inside, the silence greeted him like an old friend. He knelt, not in relief, but in gratitude for borrowed time. Somewhere beyond the town, children were still running, still hiding, still breathing. And for now, that was enough. Spring arrived cautiously, as if unsure whether it was welcome. The snow melted into muddy streets, and the river began to move again, carrying broken branches and debris downstream. The war, too, was shifting. The sounds of distant artillery grew more frequent, closer, like a storm that refused to pass. The Reich's grip on the town loosened in small, dangerous ways. Orders conflicted. Officers rotated more quickly. Fear no longer belonged only to the occupied. Father Matthias moved more slowly now. His injuries healed, but age seemed to catch up with him all at once. Still, each morning he opened the church, lit the candles, and prepared for Massachusetts parishioners noticed the bruises he did not explain. They noticed, too, that the cellar remained empty, and some understood what that meant without ever saying it aloud. One afternoon, a woman waited for him by the confessional. She was thin, her hair streaked with gray far beyond her years. When he recognized her, his breath caught. Ruth's mother stood before him, alive, altered, but unmistakable. She had survived a camp by chance and stubborn will. Liberation had come weeks earlier, chaos and hunger following close behind. She had searched through lists, rumors, refugee columns, clinging to one name spoken years ago in desperation. A priest, a church, a town she barely remembered. Matthias listened as she spoke, his hands shaking openly now. When she finished, there were no words sufficient to answer her gratitude. He simply nodded and led her to a pew, where they sat in silence broken only by the sound of breathing. Ruth returned days later, taller, thinner, older in ways childhood should not allow. She stood awkwardly in the doorway, unsure if she was allowed to cross the threshold as the person she truly was. Matthias smiled at her, the same quiet smile he had given her on that first night. She ran to him then, and he held her without concern for who might see. The war ended abruptly and messily. One day the flags were gone. The next, foreign uniforms filled the streets, welcomed with cheers and suspicion in equal measure. The town exhaled, then began the slow, painful work of accounting. Names were read aloud. Homes stood empty. Graves multiplied. Investigations followed. Questions were asked that Matthias had long prepared himself to answer. This time, the men wore different uniforms and spoke with different accents, but the folders looked the same. He told the truth now, fully and plainly. He gave names when he could, and when he could not, he gave reasons. Some called him a hero. He did not like the word. It felt too clean, too final. Others questioned his methods, his lies, his choices. He accepted that too. Moral clarity, he had learned, was rarely granted to those who lived inside the storm. The children came back in fragments over the months that followed. Some with parents, some alone, some never returned at all. Matthias attended funerals and reunions with equal reverence. He never asked for thanks. He never kept count. Years passed. The church aged with him. Repairs were made, scars covered but not erased. A plaque was placed near the entrance once, quietly, without ceremony. Matthias asked that it remain small and unsigned. Names mattered more than praise. He continued his work until his hands no longer allowed it. When he died, it was in his sleep, in the small room behind the sacristy where the first child had once hidden. The bells rang for him then, freely, without fear. At the funeral, people stood shoulder to shoulder, filling the church and spilling into the street. Among them were men and women who carried different surnames than the ones they had been born with, who spoke different languages, who lived because someone had chosen to open a door one night and never close his heart again. They remembered him not as a saint carved in stone, but as a man who had been afraid and acted anyway. A priest who had learned that faith was not proven by words spoken from the altar, but by quiet decisions made in the dark, when no one was meant to see. Long after the war became history, long after the town rebuilt and the scars softened, the story endured. It was told not in monuments, but in families, in children and grandchildren who knew that once, in a time when the world had gone mad, a single person had chosen to protect the smallest lives entrusted to him. And because of that choice, the silence beneath the church had been filled not with fear, but with breath.